In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the real-time settings. And the real-time settings will have an effect on performance, and they will also have a huge effect on how your image looks rendered here in the real-time view. The nice thing about them is a lot of the settings that you'll find in the real-time settings tab, you'll also find in the render output window. And what you can do is tune your settings in the real-time tab and use those as a gauge to determine how much you'll need when you go to do your final output. And that way you're using only the settings you need, and you're going to reduce render time as much as possible. Okay, so let's open up the project window and we'll take a look at the settings and talk about what they all do. So the first item in the list is going to be your image settings, and this will be your resolution. So this is going to be the resolution of your real-time rendered image. Now, one important thing to note is that the larger this image is, the more it's going to have an impact on performance. Basically, you are ray tracing more pixels when you have a larger resolution, and so that will take more processing power. So one of the things that you can do to improve performance is reduce the size of your real-time window, at least while you're setting up your scene. And the nice thing is you have this lock aspect ratio feature. So if I know I'm doing an image that's supposed to be 1920 by 1080, that's a lot to ray trace in real time. But what I can do is I could set that dimension, check lock aspect ratio, and then I can grab this real-time window and scale it down, and my framing is going to basically stay the same. This width to height ratio is going to maintain itself, and my image framing is going to be the same. That means I can work at this very low resolution, get everything set up, and then when I'm ready for my final output, I can press render, and I will get the same result just at a higher resolution. So it's a nice feature to have there. All right, next item in the list is going to be adjustments, and in here we have brightness and gamma. Now, brightness is going to do exactly what it says. It's going to increase or decrease the brightness of your image. Now, the difference between adjusting your brightness here and doing it under the environment tab is this is going to be like a post process to your image. So it's like applying brightness in Photoshop. However, it is a little bit more intelligent than just a standard brightness slider in Photoshop, because we are working in 32 bits. This image is always being rendered in 32 bits, and that means you're not going to lose detail in highlights and shadows when you increase or decrease the brightness. So that's the main difference there. But you will notice that what's happening here is the image doesn't need to recalculate itself, because like I said, this is a post process. Whereas if you adjust the brightness under the environment tab, what you're doing is you're increasing the brightness on your hdri, and what that's doing is it's causing more light to be emitted into the scene, and at that point it needs to be recalculated. Now, if you do have a backplate loaded, it will need to recalculate that image. The next item in the list is going to be gamma, and you can think of gamma as a fancy word for contrast. The lower you go, the more contrast you're going to get, and again, this is a post process, so the image doesn't need to recalculate itself. Now, I will tell you, you can get into trouble here if you don't know what you're doing with the gamma slider. It can cause some funny results and things to look quite off. We do have it set to the optimal setting, which is going to be 2. So this is going to control the fall off of light. Now, if you are looking to work with the gamma to increase or decrease contrast, I do suggest staying within a range of 1.8, and that's going to give you more contrast because the lower value is going to give you more, to 2.2. Those are good ranges to stay within. It is a very sensitive property, so be careful there. But generally, I'll be working at a value of 2. Now, next we have the quality settings, and these can be used to automatically improve performance. Notice when I drop it to fast, you go into performance mode, and this will allow you to move around and navigate your scene very quickly. Quality will bring it back to the settings that you manually set. And if we go under the advanced menu, we have some more settings here. And I've set this simple scene up back here to help illustrate what all these settings do. And the first one in the list is ray bounces. So let's go ahead and talk about what those do. Now, the name itself can give you a clue as to what's going on. So ray bounces are going to be the number of times that a ray of light is calculated as it bounces around a scene. And this example I have set up here is basically simulating two mirrors facing each other, and in between those we have a diamond. Okay, so there's a lot of light bouncing that's occurring here, a lot of reflections, a lot of refractions, things like that going on. Let's turn these all the way down and we'll see what happens. Okay, so we have 0 bounces going on here. And what that means is if you look at these reflective items, they're rendering pure black because we're not even allowing a single bounce of light off of these reflective items. So ray bounces are going to be very, very important for your reflective items and your transparent items. So anything that's glass, gemstones, metals, headlight enclosures on cars, all these sorts of things are where ray bounces really come into play. Okay, so let's turn it up to 1. All right, so look what we got going on there. We have 1 bounce of light reflecting off the diamond, and because it's only 1, we don't see a whole lot of complexity in this rendered result here. We don't see any light actually passing through, illuminating the plane on the other side, no light refractions on the inside of it. But if we look at this mirror over here, look what we have going on. We have 1 bounce. So we're seeing light hitting this mirror once, and it's reflecting the diamond, but since there's only 1 bounce allowed, we're not seeing any of the reflected light off of the diamond itself. If we go to 2, we should see the same result that we have here because we'll see 1 reflection bounce off of the diamond. Okay, so there we go. Not a whole lot of complexity in this look, but we are definitely getting closer. And also you'll notice that now we're seeing another reflection of the mirror. So again, just to show you here, we've got 2 mirrors facing each other. And let's again go ahead and increase our ray bounce value and see what we end up with. We'll go from 2 to 3. All right, you notice the diamond is starting to look better. We do have some more light bouncing around in there. And here's where you're going to know when you don't have enough ray bounces. You see in here we have these black areas. And again, that's just because not enough light is being allowed to calculate. Same over here with this mirror. We have this black area because the light has bounced back and forth 3 times, and it will need a 4th to actually reflect this mirror again. So we'll go to 4. And let's go ahead and keep increasing this. And notice as I increase it, it keeps on going and going. And now we have a pretty decent looking diamond there. And we have several reflections of the mirror itself, and even the reflections and refractions being reflected in the mirror. And you're going to get to a point when you're increasing your ray bounces that you're not going to notice a visual improvement on your image. When you get to this point, that's when you know you can stop increasing your ray bounces. So if I'm going from 9 to 10 and I'm looking at my image and I'm saying, hey, this isn't really improving it all that much, that might be the time when you want to say, okay, I don't need any more ray bounces. Because as you increase this number, it will take more performance to actually render that, and it will increase render time. But the nice thing about it is you can tune all of this in real time, so you know exactly how much you need and not any more than that. All right, let's talk about shadow quality. Shadow quality is going to control the quality of the shadows on the ground plane. Let me go ahead and hide this particular plane right here. So I'll go to my project window in the scene tab, and I'm going to uncheck this. Okay. Also, I'm going to go ahead and hide my environment so we can more clearly see the ground shadow. So I'll set my environment to a color. Now look at what's going on here. this shadow isn't very well defined, and you can almost see a little grid shape. And what that is the invisible ground plane that the ground shadow is projected on is subdivided up into a grid. And each one of these grid squares you can kind of think of pixels, and these pixels are going to define the look of your ground shadow. Now, if this diamond is only sitting over one or two of those pixels, that's not a whole lot of resolution to work with to really define your shadow. So what shadow quality is going to do is it's going to subdivide that grid even more so you get more pixels to work with. And you can see in there, you can see these little square shapes are starting to pack themselves into a smaller area. And we're starting to get a better look to our shadow. Now, the other thing you can do, and the one thing I do suggest before actually increasing this shadow quality, is you can go to the Environment tab, and under there, you can go to your ground size and start to reduce this. Now what that's doing is that's keeping the same amount of grid squares, but it's packing them into a smaller area. Now the one thing you want to watch out for when you are reducing this ground size is you can end up clipping and cutting your shadow. So let's zoom out here and take a look. And at some point when we get really small, you should be able to see that ground plane actually clipping. And I think we have that sharp line right there. That's probably the ground plane. So let's start to increase this, and you should see that extend out. Okay. So here's what you want to do if you are having problems with your ground shadows. First thing, go ahead and reduce your ground size as low as you possibly can to the point where you don't see any clipping. And then if you still need to improve the look of your shadows, like it looks like we do in this particular case because the diamond still has these blocky squares around it, you can go into your settings and start to increase shadow quality until you get a result that you're happy with. The other thing you can try and do as well is scale down your model. So, if the ground size is as small as it can be, and you're still noticing that there's some squares in there, go ahead and try scaling your model. So if you go to Move Object, you can always scale it up, and that will cause this to lay across more grid squares. Okay, let's talk about the next item in the list, and that's going to be detailed shadows. And detailed shadows are exactly what they say. Let me go ahead and bring back the part here. And if we go ahead and turn that off, notice that we don't have any of those nice shadows that we had before. So you do still have the ground shadow that's projected across the invisible ground plane, but we don't have any self-shadowing on the models. No self-shadowing on the geometry. So that's what detailed shadows is going to do for you. The next item in the list, this is detailed indirect illumination. Okay, now there's a few things that detailed indirect illumination is going to do. And let me go ahead and change the material type on the diamond really quick. I'm going to change this just to a diffuse, and I'm going to make it bright red. Okay, so we have this bright red object sitting on top of this white plane here. So if I go to the Settings tab and turn on Detailed Indirect Illumination, you'll notice some subtle effect going on there. And we should have more of this red color actually bleeding onto the plane. And I'm going to go ahead and switch out the environment really quick to something that's neutral. That other environment had a lot of color in it, so it was affecting the look of that red light being reflected. But here you can really see it in this neutral environment. So if I turn off Detailed Indirect Illumination, notice we don't have this indirect light bouncing occurring. We don't have light hitting this object and then reflecting down onto the plane. Now this is something that does occur out there in the real world. There's lots of light bouncing and color exchange between surfaces, and that gives us a very realistic look when we can simulate that inside of rendering software. In a lot of cases it is subtle, but you know, a lot of cases it's the subtleties that are really going to make or break an image. Now there's another thing that detailed indirect illumination is going to do. I'll go ahead and switch this back to a gem. Actually, I'll leave it there for now, but I do have a hidden part, and I want to bring that in. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to a solid glass. And let's turn off detailed indirect illumination. Okay, what's going on? What gives? Got ray bounces all day long. Can turn these up all I want, and still everything is rendered dark in there. Okay, and what that is you do need to have detailed indirect illumination on if you want to see any object underneath a transparent surface. So for those of you who are doing headlight enclosures, maybe you're doing screens on cell phones and you have texture mapped underneath the screen, if you do want that to display correctly, you'll want to make sure you have detailed indirect illumination on. Let me go ahead and hide this plane, and we'll move on to the next property. I'm going to get rid of the ground plane here, and now we're kind of noticing the same thing going on. We have detailed indirect illumination on. We have enough ray bounces, but look how dark this is under here. Okay, and the ground plane is separate from 3D geometry, the invisible ground plane that the shadows get projected on. So it also has indirect illumination. So you can turn on ground indirect illumination, and that's going to allow light to indirectly illuminate the ground plane. So if you don't have any physical geometry underneath a case like this, where you have this transparent object sitting on the ground plane and something inside of there, you'll want to turn on ground indirect illumination. Also, what it will do is it will allow light to illuminate shadows when you have a transparent object. So see there how we have this light actually passing through the gemstone there, and because this gemstone is red, it's affecting the look of that shadow. If we turn off ground indirect illumination, we end up with a pretty flat looking shadow. Okay, the ground grid is going to be a grid that will be displayed, and it will help you line up basically anything that you want to composite into a photo. You can use that as an aid for your perspective. Effects, you go ahead and make a few changes here. Let's actually go to our environment, and let's go ahead and display this. And the first effect in the list is going to be bloom. And what that's going to do is that's going to add a subtle glow to things in your scene. And it will definitely help if you are adding emissives into your scene and you'd like to see some glow around them. Now it will apply it to the whole image. So what you will want to do if you don't want this overall soft look applied to your whole image is you'll probably have to save out 2 images and do a little bit of work in Photoshop to mask out the areas where you don't want the glow to be. Let's go ahead and change this diamond here to an emissive, and we'll see what that can do for us when we actually have bloom applied to it. So what I'll do, I'll make this, let's give it a bluish hue, and I'll turn up the intensity on that emissive. Okay. And as we increase this bloom intensity, you can see that we are getting more glow around there. And what I like to do when I am using bloom is I like to use a low value on the intensity and a higher value on the radius. So you can type in a higher value than the slider will give you. So let's type in 100, and we get more of that glow around there. Also, notice what happens when I turn off ground indirect illumination. This isn't affecting the ground shadow anymore. Let me bring back that hidden geometry. So now that I have that plane there, if I turn off detailed indirect illumination, this glow won't affect other geometry. So these 2 items will come into play when you're using emissives as well. Okay. And just to show you the effect of the emissive, if I darken my lighting environment by pressing the down arrows, I will still have this geometry being illuminated. And if we turn on these items, we should get some illumination going on there. Now, the other item in the list and the last item in our settings tab is going to be the vignetting strength. So you do have the ability to add somewhat of a lens vignetting effect. And this is an effect you can see in photography with certain lenses. And if we start to increase this, it will darken up the edges of our image, and you can start to pull the focus of the viewer's eye inward by doing this. Okay, so that's a look at the settings tab.